Nkrumah spoke of consensus. Julius Nyerere spoke of Ujana. Kenneth Kaunda proposed Zambian humanism, and Leopold Senghor of Senegal spoke of negritude. These have all faded away. You want to know why? What you don't promote dies. Now let me ask us, how importantly do our leaders today regard our intellectuals, our philosophers, our literary community, our dramatists, our psychologists, our bards, our griots? Our political conferences are usually peopled by the very wrong crowd, in my view. You need traditional historians, well versed in the cultural intricacies of the people. You need religious leaders who will draw from your own deities to contribute to the discourse. You need studied university eggheads. You need lawyers. You need historians. Their job is to define and dimension the Nigerian state. Right now, all you have to do to be a Nigerian is to be one of Nigerian parentage. That is not a code to which citizens will subscribe. That is an aspect of history. Your allegiance to the national code of conduct is your badge of citizenship. That is how you deal decisively with the victim syndrome and low self-esteem. In the Bible says that we have been accepted in the beloved. You have to be accepted into something. That brings me to the concept of the white man's burden and the role of education. The white man's burden is actually a historical term used by the colonialists to justify imperialism in the 19th and 20th century. First of all, let us all understand that the white man is not your enemy. He's actually your friend. Anybody who educates you cannot be your enemy. No matter what his motive is for doing so, if he educates you, he is your friend. The truth is, even your best friend can and will inadvertently abuse and exploit you if you are vulnerable. If you do not resist, he will continue to do so. That is life. Even between a husband and a wife. If a wife or a husband allows their spouse to keep using and abusing them, it will continue until they speak out or resist. Personally speaking, and this may offend some people, I am not angry or bitter about colonialism. For all its many ills and injustices, and there were several cases of inhumane brutality, Africans decided to dwell upon. Colonialism actually jump-started a forceful and tangential impetus away from the entitlement and complexity mentality of the continent. Indeed, many of you know that Professor Paazadeh was the director of the Institute of African Studies at Carleton University in Canada. But like every other IAS, that's the Institute of African Studies, it is an institute founded by the university that deals with all disciplines and aspects of African studies. It attracts intellectuals and professors of every imaginable subject that touches on African psychology, mores, music, diaspora and transnational studies. It deals with African economics, literature, politics. I'm not sure if there are any other IAS Institute of African Studies in the West or in the East that has a native-born African as its director. That was what Paazadeh was doing in Canada. But I'll have you know that Institute of African Studies exists in many other places in the world. There's actually one in Russia that is 60 years old this year. It was established by the Russian Academy of Sciences. It is older than the oldest Institute of African Studies in Africa, which is the one in the University of Ibadan. That is 57 years old this year. Speaking personally, I think it's a travesty that any Europeans or North American would head up an IAS anywhere in the world. You cannot properly teach what you do not know or have not lived simply because you do research on it. And when I say this, I don't mean that a white man, if you are white and you were born in Africa, your experience and conditioning is African, then you are African. It's not a function of the color of your skin. Now we cannot blame others for at least establishing those centers. No. What we ought to do is celebrate them as our friends and then show exemplary scholarship ourselves so that we can lead the way. That is the onerous role that Professor Paazadeh found himself in at the director of IAS in Canada. We move over to now decolonizing education. There is an obvious and pressing need for Africa to decolonize education. We must deconstruct the subliminal notions across the continent that formalize models of education are alien or foreign to our culture. We must see the pursuit of academic knowledge outside the prism of an external imposition. To succeed in this, many of the subjects we teach must have local protagonists or heroes. So instead of studying Adam Smith alone, which I studied in economics in secondary school, we must also study Owodunni Tariba. We must study Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. We must study Patrick Utomi. Education is the basis of life itself. Even if it's alien to you in any respect, you are disadvantaged right from the gate. The world is not nice. Africans need to stop living in an idealistic cocoon. Injustice is rife across the human race. And there are many grave injustices being perpetrated by Africans against their fellow Africans even today. Some even worse than what the white man did to you. The fact that they are the same color as you should not and cannot excuse it. Many of you are not aware of the horrible kafala system that is being perpetrated this day by the Gulf countries of the Middle East. It is nothing more than an officially sanctioned slavery on steroids. Low-skilled African workers who travel there to work are routinely dehumanized. Many come back with physical disabilities, and many others do not come back alive. We romanticize Uhuru and Ubuntu in Africa, but these are ideals of a soon coming paradise in the sweet by and by. We have to build a hellish and brutish conditions for the nasty now and now. You can only make progress when you partake in, engage with, and triumph against your fellow human beings in a festival of ideas. Our foray in Africa into formal education systems at a national scale has been a mixed bag. But in recent times in Nigeria, I can simply say that it's one of the greatest tragedies of the modern era. We are performing woefully in lifting our people out of ignorance. In knowledge economy, we are dropping downwards in every learning index at an alarming rate. In keeping with the so-called white man's burden argument of developing darker-skinned peoples around the world, strict models of formal education were introduced. Almost everybody I know says that the quality of education back then was top-rate. Many African universities back then were actually rated higher than their counterpart Western universities in terms of the quality of the graduates that they produced. Today, our higher institutions, especially in Nigeria, produce half-baked products because of underfunding on the one hand and poor organization on the other. This is primarily because, as a people, we have not yet seen or appreciated the linkage between an enlightened citizenry and a prosperous society. Or maybe, folks just don't even want a prosperous society. We need to interrogate that. Perhaps it's not an accident that we're the way we are. Perhaps there are some people who really want us to be the way we are. I'm talking of Africans, African leaders. Again, we must look at the silver lining of the cloud. Nigerian private universities are churning out pretty good products, proving that we do not need foreigners to tell us what to do. I have a young neighbor who went to a prominent private university in Nigeria. They have a homegrown course called the Total Man Concept. And then they have another course on entrepreneurship that teaches you how to think like an entrepreneur. Now these are not elective courses, but mandatory courses that you will take every year throughout your state school. It's not surprising that their graduates are always in hot demand in the Nigerian labor market. However, this SME at one time was sponsored by the Carnegie Foundation to take back knowledge to Africa. Take back knowledge to Africa. On our own, it will take us forever, if not never, to catalyze the modernization of the primal African systems and the redefinition of our training, financial, legal, and security frameworks without having representatives at the table of the world's multilateral institutions where decisions are made. It has been said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. In Nigeria, the sectors where we have had tremendous global engagement and or growth in our economy have been areas where we utilize some of our best Nigerian assets who had interpersonal relationships with the biggest decision makers in the world to ensure that our interests are not just protected or vigorously pursued at the highest levels. I speak of the Ministry of Finance, for instance, where you had Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who was able to wipe out debts that we were going to several organizations in the West. I also speak of the Ministry of Agriculture, where we had Akumi Additional, transforming agriculture in Africa. Tremendous and tangible strides were made with significant global engagement in the ministries where they served while they were under their charge. In every case, after they left those ministries, you found a diminishing of the effectiveness in the driving of change, and things reverted to being rather insular and adversarial in part to Western institutions. You need to incorporate the West in your plans. The Japanese did it, the Koreans did it, and the Chinese are doing it. Western thought and culture has become all-encompassing and hegemonic. You can't win a hegemon by being his adversary. Hegemons do what they want to do by themselves only when they are convinced by themselves. And you cannot destroy a hegemon by positing morality or justice. Unfortunately, in the highest realms of human interaction regarding wealth, power, or influence, morality and justice tend to take a backseat for the personal and group interests fueled by human greed. Only hegemons can destroy themselves by themselves through their own internal strife and angst. Nobody took down Rome or Egypt or the British Empire. Their own internal strife and angst weakened them to the point where the citizens lost sight of the original vision that enabled them to become empires. Usually, this is because they have become very self-entitled, irreligious, and hedonistic in their appetites. For too long, people believe that Africans are not adventurous. But if you believe in the out of Africa theory, it was Africans who migrated out of Africa about 175,000 years ago and subsequently populated the entire world. If that is not adventurism, I don't know what is. The only difference is that the ethos of African migrations is not in the main colonial. They seek integration and communal living. That trait is not native to their skin color. It is native to the values they have taught in the prevailing culture on the continent. Unfortunately, it has contributed to their undoing. For now, let me just jump now to the role of language. Communication is everything. 70% of communication, human communication, is non-verbal, but the remaining 30% has to be rich enough to capture most of the human experience as precisely as possible. Most of our languages in Africa have suffered stasis, but for there to be social progress, communication and the means by which it is conducted has to be scientific, structured, and growing. Ngugi wa Thiong'o recently explained in one of his latest books that what drove his decision to stop writing in English and start writing in his Kikuyu language or dialect was that to starve and kill a language is to starve and kill the people's memory bank. I agree with him, but we must recognize the limits in the post-colonial world of limited capacity of expression when you are contending with forces too big to ignore. Let me illustrate quickly. Who can tell me what the word green is in Yoruba language, or in Igbo, or in Hausa? I asked my friend in Yoruba, and a way happens to be the word leaf. How can you use the word leaf to describe the word? That's a limited ability to communicate. Can anybody translate the word anxiety in their native tongue? Or voltage? Or physics? Or placebo? Or human rights? Or psychology? I didn't think so. I was about 18 or 19 when I read in the Guardian newspapers an article written by Father Matthew Hazakuka. It was during all the hula baloo about creating a Nigerian language, and folks coined the phrase at that time of what that language would be called. They called it Wazobia, for those of us who are old enough to remember. Kuka wrote a beautiful masterpiece. He argued that language is not culture, but an element of it. And therefore, by changing language alone, you achieve nothing. I agree with him. I also heard Chimamanda vociferously refuse to be told by the interviewer that the English language she writes and speaks in is a foreign language. She quickly responded with an alarmed look on her face. No, it is mine. You can't take it away from me. Even the English language really can no longer, the English cannot really claim that the language is theirs. Because it's alive, it is dynamic, it is heavily eclectic and borrows from all languages. English belongs to all of us. Cheikh Anta Diop communicated his thoughts in French. It doesn't make the ethos of his writings any less African or Senegalese for that matter. In fact, if anything, it gives him the freest range of expression to indicate and transform the way that I'll wrap up with just one last paragraph. The role of the African elite. Nothing happens by accident. Today we celebrate Shakespeare, but do you know that he was financially supported to enable him to pursue his craft? His patrons were the Queen Elizabeth and King James I, both of whom greatly loved drama, and Shakespeare was extremely loyal to their court in return. Which of our African millionaires or billionaires is supporting an African intellectual today? Of course, there are a few instances, isolated instances. But who is deliberately backing the African initiative? Finally, the bottom line is that all of us have to engage. To engage is a verb, and it means more than just being a mental participant. The rubber has to meet the road. Friction is what produces motion. You cannot trust any leader to build a world-class hospital in Nigeria when they themselves are not patronizing it. You cannot entrust any politician to devote meaningful sums to building world-class educational facilities in Nigeria if their children are schooling in Europe. The elite themselves must also engage. The last general elections in Nigeria proved this point so eloquently. Many who were social media warriors created a buzz on the internet, but surprisingly, less than 100,000 people showed up to vote for the folks who were making all the right noises in terms of policy. You have to have skin in the game to make a difference. Whether you like it or not, all the current political players who won and are in charge right now actually do have skin in the game. They've lost friends and loved ones and resources Sometimes several times over to be where they are right now. That is what has qualified them to be there. Life is not a theory. The same even in Europe and America. Very rarely does someone just arise out of nowhere, enter the fray and win. He or she may not even be able to survive the heat in the kitchen if they get there. Politics is a game that throws up the cannibalistic appetite of the players. Many times politicians eat up members of their own camp and block. Not everyone can and should be in the front line of politics or government. Stay on your track and make your contributions there. That is what Pius Adesanya did. A little controversy or reputational smear never did anyone any harm. What you must never trade off is your honor. We can do it. We must do it.